welcome to the Humboldt Forum Artist Talk Prolonged Perspectives, which is part of the Langen, Nacht, Ideen. I'm Amina Aziz, and I'm very glad that I'm speaking today with three brilliant minds: Zara Zandieh, Jeremiah Mosese, and Priya Basil. Good to have you here. Priya Basil is a writer and activist. Growing up in an Indian Sikh family in Kenya, studying in the UK, and living in Germany since 2003, has shaped her body of work as well as her activism. Her 2007 debut novel Ishq and Mushk is a multi-generational saga that echoes Basil's own family trajectory. Moving between India, Kenya, Uganda, and England, the novel portrays individual destinies against the backdrop of historic upheavals, such as the partition of India.
I did not know that the very idea of who counts as a citizen, who can belong, would be brazenly contested as illiberal currents, nationalistic, racist, misogynistic, swelled in Germany and across the globe.
Basil has acknowledged that living in Germany altered her understanding of politics, opening up the possibility of collective engagement as a very personal form of belonging, and since participated in different political campaigns. This formative experience is described in her 2019 book, Be My Guest, a text that marks Basil's departure from fiction into a hybrid terrain. Blending forms and genres, she makes a passionate plea for hospitality in Europe. Basil's most recent work is the film essay Locked In and Out, which explores the Humboldt Forum from a post-colonial perspective. Zara Zandieh is a filmmaker born and based in Berlin. The stories told through Zandieh's projects are dedicated to a decolonial and queer perspective that intertwines complexities and multi-layered representations of post-migrant and marginalized subjects into poetic narratives. Zandieh gives often invisibilized voices a prominent place in their works and blends them with stunning artistic visuals. In Octavia's Visions, Zandieh embraces the works of the visionary fiction author Octavia E. Butler and shows empowering struggles of the past and dystopian realities of the present while thinking about a better future. Octavia's Vision speaks to contemporary themes of environmental degradation, far-right extremism, and social liberation, and envisions a queer utopia. Jeremiah Mosese is a Berlin-based self-taught filmmaker and visual artist born in Lhotse in Lesotho in the south of Africa, where he grew up. When he was a child, he already became fascinated with cinema and initially started to write poetry before he transformed that poetry into the poetic films he makes. Spirituality, memories, life and death, beginnings and endings are topics one will discover in his films. Mosese's works speak of reconciliation of the past moments in order to create the future, imagined, possible, ancient futures. His works reflect on the relationship between a land and the universe, and he uses philosophical and surreal expressions to ask questions of Africa's history and the impact of colonialism, while also telling stories of resistance and decolonization. For the Humboldt Forum, he has created the visually stunning video installation, A Black Man Who Sold His Skin and His Sons Who Bought and Sewed It Back, in which he addresses the topics of mercy and forgiveness and connecting it to the neo-antique aesthetics of the Humboldt Forum. What are we going to talk about today? Of course, we are going to talk about the quite different works, actually, of these three artists. We will find out what their common ground is, but also we are going to try to find answers to the pressuring questions of our times. How can social transformation be achieved? What is the meaning of decolonization, and what does belonging even mean? Now, the overarching topic of this talk are ideas for tomorrow, so we will talk about utopian ideas of the future, and we will do that by acknowledging that we therefore need to take a look at the past and the now. Now, I think that we cannot simply swipe it under the carpet, and so I would like to address the elephant in the room. We are sitting here inside the Humboldt Forum that was criticized by many artists and activists, not only for being far too expensive, but it was also criticized for wiping out history, as some say, when there's no trace left of the Palast der Republik, the parliament building of the former East German government. And now Humboldt Forum is again making headlines by exhibiting colonial stolen art instead of returning it. Some activists say we cannot work with the Humboldt Forum or in this building since decolonization means to get rid of this building. Others say we need to transform the Humboldt Forum into an anti-colonial forum. Now I'm very curious, since I don't have a final answer for myself, I would like to ask you what you think. Maybe Priya, because your film addressed these issues, I would like to ask you if you had any doubts doing commissioned work or working for the Humboldt Forum, or any doubts coming here. What do you think about being here? Maybe a somewhat unusual question. How do you feel being here?
Conflicted, ambivalent, and very curious and questioning. I think that it's important to say right at the beginning that, quoting Stuart Hall, the brilliant cultural theorist, that I am here because you were there. We are here because colonists were in Africa, in India, in different parts of the world, European colonists. And we are still kind of living the legacy of European colonialism. And I'm here because there are people who ignore that history, and this building who insisted on building a building like this, who campaigned for it, lobbied for it over years. And so, in a way, you know, I didn't choose to be here. I'm here because something was made that I disagree with. I'm here because there are people who care about the fact that there was this colonial history. And so I'm here because there are others who want to engage with these questions in a different way. And I'm especially here because of the colleagues that I am able to speak with today. And I think that this sense of being on kind of uneven ground in a state of disequilibrium is something that stays with me whenever I'm in this space or thinking about this space called the Humboldt Forum.
I feel like we are the manifestation of a long dialogue that has been happening. We are part of the canon that sort of igniting the idea of decolonizing spaces, and especially if you look at the Humboldt Forum, which is an enterprise that is absolutely rooted in a European imperialistic logic. And yet here I am as a black person exhibiting the work where I speak for, or I speak with black people. My work, it's pretty much dedicated to that. And my work also reflects on this. It mirrors this space. It's aware of this space. It's not just in the dark. I'm aware of the space. I'm aware of why I'm exhibiting here. And I feel like I'm a part of this canon of people who are speaking out to decolonize the place. And I feel like also when I was negotiating with myself, I felt like it's the place that is attempting to decolonize itself. And in order to decolonize itself, it needs people like us to be part of it, because that's the whole, I think, the struggle. I guess sometimes it's almost like the rituals goes so long and we forget even the idea behind what we're doing. And I think the idea is that there can be sort of a diversity in the space, and and that we are able to create the work that we like to do as a people of color. We can create for Black people of color, we can create for them and speak with them. And I feel like in this way, it's the part of decolonization in that way, whether they are forced or whether they truly attempt to actually reconstruct themselves. And I feel like we are part of that canon to sort of move and sort of transform the space.
For me, it was definitely an ambivalent decision as well. And I talked to friends who were also in the No Humboldt campaign, all these years before, and did a lot of, or do still a lot of activist decolonial work in Berlin about changing names of streets, for example, which were named after colonizers or German colonial, kind of people in power. So yeah, and then when I got the request, I was after talking to my friends and digging also, I mean, it's a 15 or longer year old process. End of 90s, the decision was made to change this area and to dismantle the Palast der Republik. So it's a very long debate in the city. And I'm super aware of it. And for me, the final decision was, it was similar to what you said, if we can put perspectives from Black and people of color and indigenous people on the walls of the Humboldt Forum and also speak to a mainstream in another way, and also allow, in my work also, for example, it's also talking about queer subjects and talking about Black Lives Matter and the recent, kind of last year, the uprisings which came up, and also trans feminine visibility, for example. So if those contents can be put in a mainstream, I think it's super interesting what kind of bridges of dialogue we can maybe build. And I'm also curious what will happen and how it will be received, or what people who I might not usually be able to address because they are not coming to the film festivals where films are shown, or how will they react to our work, kind of. So I think, like many things in life, it's not binary. There's no good and wrong. There's not only two sides, and it's full of shades of different kind of aspects. And I find it an important challenge to step into this kind of dialogue, with each other. And of course, there's a lot of critique about it, to do it or not. But I think all of that, also the opposition is important, opposing this building, opposing the process, having a lot of critique on how it was built with how much money, all of that is as valid and important and as other, kind of maybe artistic kind of accesses to touch people, to move people, to start dialogues, which are super necessary, especially in a very polarized atmosphere we are living in.
I mean, for me, there's a very strong distinction between the people who have lobbied to build this building and what their intentions are. I mean, this building is like a state-funded project. It is a recreation of a Prussian castle, which is at times synonymous with militarism, with colonialism, with chauvinism. And it was rebuilt with a kind of blindness as to what that past was. And the building itself, I feel, stands for a kind of deception and a distortion of history. And so, although these are the currents that you talk about and which I am part of, they are an attempt to deconstruct this illusion of, permanence, of heroism, of authority. I still really worry about this building because I feel like it has such a kind of assertive, muscular authority that even though I'm very heartened, I mean, when I see work like yours that comes out of responding to these questions, I'm very inspired and heartened, and at the same time, I'm really conscious that making a building like this makes the task of decolonizing much harder.
Someone said, my partner was like, I think you are actually almost directly speaking for the Humboldt Forum. And I said, no, they don't deserve my gaze. I speak with the black people, especially African people. And for me, in this space that is rooted in this imperialistic logic, but also I'm aware of the fact that there are people who might be saying, no, you guys are selling out, or maybe that's what they want your faces. And I was aware, but at the same time, I feel like if there's a spirit of the time that is existing at this point where there's a sort of a shift. It might be short-lived renaissance, but it's very important. I think it might not change with us, but it might change someday, maybe, hopefully in the future, or not even our generation, maybe the generation that is coming after us. And I feel like we can play the role of at least being a part of that sort of a deconstruction, even if it's a facade, even if it's just a mask that it will masquerade in sort of a different mask, different face, or different tone, but it's still the same thing. But at the same time, if we destroy the system, if we destroy the building, the system stays. It's like the same with one of the things that I like about, for instance, cancel culture movement. One of the beauty of it is that people can actually speak and have voice, and people who are in a key position who are abusing their power, they can be accountable. But at the same time, I always feel like we demonize the person, but the system remains the same. My interest is the system. It's not necessarily, it's actually not even a system, but it's what produces system. And it always boils down to the psyche of course, the people who are operating the space as well. And I feel like it's both ways. This idea of decolonizing a space, it goes both ways. It's not just me as a person of color, as a black person, as a black African person to come up with the whole idea of the decolonization or be part of the decolonization. I think it's two-way street. They need to be sort of reciprocal.
I think it's both ways. Like we need to be critical about what does it stand for, and those forces who wanted this building to stand for, they're still in their positions, and like they still haven't given the access away to other people to come and to maybe change the system. So it stands for a system which is manifesting itself for sure. For me, the question is like kind of, can the Humboldt Forum turn what they want to do inside out? Will they, for example, hire more people who have a critical stand and a decolonial stand towards the German kind of history? That means that, for example, white men might need to leave their positions in order to make space for other people to come. And in general, I guess, like what does it mean if you stand for something but then you don't do it, and it stays like kind of lip service? So how that can be integrated also in the structures of the Humboldt Forum is another question. Is this like going to be just something they will show and then feel better with that we've ticked all the boxes like Black, POC, and queer and whatever, like, or will they also really change their internal structures to an extent where everything which is curated speaks from another new, futuristic, decolonial, dismantling the system kind of way? But what do you think? Because you asked the question.
I think of what Gayatri Spivak said, that to persistently what was it again? It was to persistently critique a structure that one cannot not inhabit is a deconstructing stance. And I think there is something about this cannot not, which is part of my my engagement, that I cannot not be part of what's going on here, because it speaks so strongly of so many of the problems of our times. And so I feel like this kind of responsibility, artistic, political, moral, and there is also something exciting in responding to a challenge that seems impossible. So yeah, it's a mixed bag of feelings, and I imagine it will remain that way. And I feel like, it's okay to be in contradiction. I mean, this can be a very interesting sort of way of dealing with and negotiating one's responses.
I would like to now talk about ideas. How do ideas come to you as creative people? And maybe we can start with you, Zara. You have an explicitly political stance and take that and transform it into art, yet you raise questions rather than you give answers. Do you want to challenge the viewers? Is that something you have in mind? Or what do you think about when you try to begin with a new project? How do ideas come to you?
When we do artistic things, what we like in an ideal case do is to touch people's souls somehow with issues which are kind of, which matter. It might be a daily thing or like up to zeitgeist thingy, like it matters in that moment, or it matters because it's around emotions and spirituality, for example, like you do a lot in your work. And I think for me it's like kind of looking around what is happening right now in the world, but also what kind of vision I have for the future. And with Octavia's visions, I was like reading Octavia Butler's parables, and it was for me really amazing to see how this black science fiction or visionary fiction writer in the 90s could foresee a lot of what is happening right now. Even the time where things are happening are 2025 to 40 something. So it's really speaking to our time and what the time which is coming. And for example, in Octavia Butler's works and the parables, she also stated that the climate is, and the climate crisis is an own character. So, and we are there right now. We know all the numbers, we know like what the scientists say, and so to read somebody who was so visionary in the 90s was kind of, for me, also like inspiring. How can I take it further and how can I integrate it to where we are right now and what we are just actually like experiencing.
Yeah, maybe Priya, there was a shift in your work, correct me if I'm wrong, when you came to Germany, but did that also change your approach to your work when you made different type of work?
I think so, because I feel as though I became a politically active and aware person from moving to Germany, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but I had the possibility of participating in public life in a way that I hadn't living in Kenya or in the UK, or in a way that I hadn't chosen to do. It wasn't obvious to me as a space of appearance that was available. And I think to think and act with others in public is, for me, a very formative experience, because you're very vulnerable when you do that. And so to become aware of how your intervening is seen and how it changes the way you see, I think that shifted me to this nonfiction mode, to kind of also allow myself to be quite explicitly in the work that I write. And to show myself in relation to the things around me. I think definitely the activism and the political engagement ended up influencing the direction of writing, so that it went from fiction towards non-fiction, although still very much using the techniques of fiction, the storytelling. The stories remain essential to whatever I'm writing.
When I start to create, I try to approach work or ideas as a novice, as a child, as someone who's stumbling upon things. I like to stumble upon things. I like to think that I create almost like a very subconscious place. I don't think of language. I don't think of a form. I don't think of politics. I don't think of nothing. Even with like what's happening at this time, what's popping, what's new, what is everybody talking about, I don't think of that. I approach ideas with such a trepidation, with such a fear, that I try to be empty. I try to be a vessel of that moment, of that very time when the ideas start coming. and to be faithful to them. And for some reason, they start to be faithful to me. If you look at the 4th chapter of the Metamorphosis, it was just about my dilemma, but it ended up mirroring what's happening now with the sculptures and with the new, with the old, and the new emerging from the old. So this, I think it comes with being faithful to ideas, because I start to realize that I don't own them. They're not mine, but they're somewhere there, and I happen to be in that space and to be sort of a vessel to be used to become a good steward of ideas. I'm learning to be a good steward.
Can I add something, because it really spoke to me what you were saying? I feel Afrofuturist feminist writers, for example, people like around, like I was attending the Allied Media Conference in Detroit. Detroit has been such a place within the US to create like self-empowered, black, futuristic kind of voices, may it be in techno and electronic music, or may it be in futurist writings, and also was influenced by and inspired by works of people who are actually right now dealing with like the legacy of Octavia Butler, and like who are engaging with the legacy, like people like Edwin Mary Brown or Alexis Pauline Gams. And yeah, so it's like and the person, one of the people who are kind of who we asked if we are allowed to use their quote, is an actual trans two-spirited activist who was her name or their name is Raven Wings, and I asked them if we can use their speech, which they were like holding in Toronto during the Black Lives Matters like protests.
We need to create a world, a humanity, where everyone and everything is allowed to exist, because we already do. White supremacists, they're creating an ideal of society and using the state to enforce it. And this is what we are fighting against. Before you all became white, you were something else. And we were something else.
We are speaking English, English being a colonial language, German being a colonial language. So I find it very interesting to find out or ask you how you find your own language, literally, but also visually. Maybe Priya.
Well, the first thing to say about English is, of course, is that not all English is the same, and that English coming out of formerly colonized states has its own preoccupations and its own rhythms and its own characteristics. Remember Chinua Achebe said, "Do not be deceived that we write in English, because we intend to do unheard of things with it." And what interests me is the idea of sort of finding another way to use a major and dominant language. And with my own writing, one of the things is, as I said, this polyphony, so to use many-voicedness. And with the film that I made for the Humboldt Forum, first I wrote a text, and then I had to find a visual language to go with this very dense text.
Can we really speak of ethnological museums? Might it not be more accurate to say ethno-illogical museums for places that have long propagated racist classifications and hierarchies, turned stolen cultural artifacts into tools for enforcing white domination? What I can do is act to contribute to a broader effort for change, an anti-colonial effort that has been unfolding through all time and which, in our time, expresses itself in many different modes and assemblies.
I wasn't going to show the building in a kind of like to sort of continue its own narration of asserting and being confident, that it would always be deconstructed. You would just see little parts of it. The film language would be sometimes stuttering, there would be blurs, that would be out of focus, the camera would be shaking at points. And so not to kind of give in to the seduction, the aesthetic seduction that can happen in spaces, that in buildings that are kind of big and imposing and beautiful in certain ways. There's something that the philosopher Gilles Deleuze says, and he talks about the writer being a stutterer in language. And that sounds very strange, because you kind of think you want to be eloquent and fluent. And one of the things that's interesting for me is to think, how can you remain a foreigner in your own language, so that you don't maybe follow the kind of typical rhythms. And I think that's related to what you say. It's about being true to yourself. So kind of to remain estranged from what is expected and what is the norm and what is the standard, to sort of step back from that and find forms of expression that maybe disrupt and undermine a dominant narrative.
My first language was Farsi, so it's also really different from German or English, and it's quite poetic as well. Or like, for example, the word for heart and stomach is the same, which I find really cool.
So beautiful.
Yeah. So I guess these things you find a lot in different languages. We grew up with hearing stories our parents would tell us or they read to us, but those were also different than what we would read in the kindergarten or hear in the kindergarten. So I guess, of course, that shaped the way, like, I guess I'm telling stories in an intuitive, subconscious like way or something. And for the visual and cinematic language, I was quite influenced by works from Trinity Minha, for example, or Maya Deren or Forough Farrokhzad, who I think did such a poetic job and like also decolonial job and like working with language in film in general, like editing language, but also either imagery. And I guess somehow it is also based on a feminist kind of cinematic language, which always was like, because it was not seen in the same way and because there's a long way to get space in the industry, for example, there was always like a kind of different standpoint and questioning like the objective gaze, for example, and things like that.
I mean, one of the things that was also quite a challenge for me in the film essay I did was showing the objects that are part of the Humboldt Forum's collections. And there was this kind of long debate that I had with myself and with others, thinking, is it appropriate to show these stolen objects in the context of my film? Is that like a reproduction of a claim? So if they can't be there, how can they just be in my film? And I was really so unsure, and I tried it in different ways, and then I spoke to some different museum experts who are sort of, you know, have thought about these things for a long time. And one of them said to me, you know, we're kind of at the beginning of figuring all this out. These conversations are by no means established. There's no rule book, so don't feel inhibited. I mean, of course, one wouldn't show human remains or something. And another person said to me, don't hesitate. You know, anything that counters the museum narrative, these objects deserve to be in another context. They deserve different kinds of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I felt very emboldened by that, to think, you know, that to give another context, to give another possibility is, yeah, one doesn't have to always know everything and always be like fully informed, but that one does it in a considered way, responsibly and in earnest.
Mm-hmm. I would like to pick that up and ask you what decolonization means to you. Is it important for you in your works?
Of course, it's also decolonial, but maybe for me it's more about which kind of society on this planet do I wish to see in the future, and what changes need to be done. And one of them is to make all the people who have the least access to resources and spaces and all of that, to equalize the system, like the systems in which we are navigating. And so change for me means like, how can we make everyone more equal. Like that's.
But I also wonder equal how though, right? Because I mean, if we think of like who is like first among equals, we have like the white male, and I don't want to be equal like that. That's not the equality I want. So what equal to equal in what sense and at what cost?
For me, change or where to go is definitely not to use the structures and patterns which we just had and which are destroying our planets and societies and all of that as an utopian vision, but to learn from the ancient and like as if we would look at our ancestors' indigenous cultures and like kind of sayings and signs which they developed, and also were foreseen and keep foreseeing like things which are happening, and to look into the future. Like it's kind of the gaze can't be not to look at what we have done so far and then like let's just jump into like this capitalist structure, for example, or patriarchal structure, but that kind of how can we build a sustainable different future which is actually so much smarter than what we had. Because if you look at it, and I mean there's so much knowledge on this world and we are still not able to use it in some ways in order to be sustainable. Like we are destroying ourselves over so many generations now. So I think the answer is not like to go and to just take space in the existing structures, but to change the structures and learn from what has been said and what younger generations also demand, because it's not like younger generations don't have any kind of vision about their future or something.
I think there are people who see the pandemic has been devastating, right? Like over 3 million people have died all over the world, yet we keep continuing, like doing everything to reopen and just like continue to do everything, but there is this other side. So for me the question is, how do we make things more visible, maybe in addition to what you said?
Of course, there are people who are really sort of very alert to the problems there. I mean, there are artists making work. There's so many different voices. You're absolutely right. Who can describe things in a way that really compels us to act and helps us to see. But for me there's a gap between that and the kind of politics that we see being enacted. And how to bridge that gap, I'm not sure. I mean, one thing that I really wish we had during the course of this pandemic is a citizens' assembly. I mean, it would have been a perfect opportunity, especially with just these digital possibilities, to gather different kinds of people from all parts of society and consult with them about how we might want to deal with what we're going through. This is such a missed opportunity, having these kind of very small, specially selected and not very diverse circles, mainly dominated by men, deciding how the responses should be. I find that a totally missed opportunity. That would be one thing for me, like to kind of rethink our democratic models. But again, very often, I feel right now, we can't be on the street in the ways that we might want to ask for change. And I feel the politicians are quite unimaginative, and I wouldn't want their job right now either. It must be so difficult to be constantly weighing things up and to have the feeling that every decision you take is wrong or not right enough. But nevertheless, I do think a kind of wider consultative process would also give us a different feeling for having got through this together. And also such short-sighted thinking. I mean, for a year we've been living with this idea that in 3 months' time, we can go back somehow to how things were. And what if we had thought from the very beginning, like this is how it is, how could we manage our societies if this was the conditions in which we had to do all the things that really matter to us? Like, where would we be by now? Maybe we would have a universal basic income. I just think that maybe different policies would have come into place if the goal wasn't always like 2 or 3 months before we can revert.
There are other works of really amazing artists that I've seen like really inspiring the change, and I'm talking about in a grassroots level, not just as a hype, as an idea, but really making a very physical and tangible change. And I like to believe this. I mean, at times, I struggle with this, like my work, like looking at the place in which my work exists, like in a sense of, am I doing something right? Am I reaching people that I intend to reach in my work? But at the same time, I console myself with little emails or messages that I get, and someone says, hey, someone from Palestine or from India, who always people write me, say, hey, my day was good today. So I console myself with this, that as much as it's small, it means a lot to me. But of course, everybody's a dream of every artist to sort of have that change that is tangible, that you can see and touch and smell, and you know, it sort of validates what you do. But yeah, like I said, I have this small moments of someone who tells me about, like recently, there was a guy who told me about that he forgave his father, and for me, it's I pride with these moments.
Yeah, transformation, it sounds like a word that needs to, where you see some kind of massive wave rolling across a whole society, but actually these moments in a life, they are so precious that you worked something like that in somebody. That's amazing.
There's this Iranian director, Abbas Kiarostami, and he was asked, like, he was famous and his films were shown everywhere, and he was asked, yeah, what do you think about piratery, and the people are copying your films and selling them illegally? And actually he said, it's okay with me because this is a way for me to connect with people. Yeah. And he gets this feedback, as you said, like, I loved your film, it was beautiful and everything. So I thought that maybe this is something like the feedback you get or different things you see that makes you think, no, this is what I should like be concerned about maybe. Or
yeah, and also even I sometimes try to, especially when I show films in a festival that sort of cater for people who are living in the communities, people who cannot necessarily afford the tickets or they don't even know about the festival. And I like this sort of outdoor screening that reach the real people. Like what I said with when my film is pirated somewhere in Lesotho or somewhere in Kailami in South Africa, in the hood, this will be for me my, wow, I'll just be so happy. And because I cry about this, sometimes I feel like I'm in the exhibition and I cannot, people who are in this space, I can't even relate. This is not, my work is not for them. It's, I feel like I'm jacking off. And I feel like it's this dilemma between jetting off and having this small, you know, messages that you get that you feel like you're doing the right thing.
I mean, in the Schlüterhof, of course, your work is accessible to anyone who's passing by for free, which I think is a really good thing. That there is that accessibility in that sense, and also that people who maybe come expecting one thing from here will end up with something quite different. Yeah. And that's also rather wonderful to have that opportunity to surprise and to seduce, you know, without necessarily being didactic or anything, but just letting the work speak to these people, whoever these visitors are, and maybe shift some sense of what the space is really about and what else lies beyond and behind it.
And also even the idea of making them understand it, or thinking that they will understand it, I think it sort of pigeonholes us as well, because sometimes it's about the feeling. Like I remember when I was doing Mother, Suffocating, this is my last film about you, it's sort of an essay, and I showed it to the bunch of shepherds, and I was very curious how they will receive it. Because most of, if you talk about film in this area, you're talking about blockbuster, you're talking about like action movies. But I was very surprised how they were actually thinking about it. And I felt so bad that I actually judged them, that I thought it would be something that is boring for them. And I feel like sometimes it's just about the feeling. It's just about, they will create their own language that communicates with them, with this film, when they're perceiving it, when they're seeing it, when they're hearing it with their eyes. And I feel like, yeah, sometimes it's sort of pigeon you in a sense of creating, because these people will understand this. It comes to their level. but also I think it's good to create that it sort of inspire ideas. Another thing that boils down to, I guess my core quest, or maybe my core dream, is to inspire ideas, that my work can inspire ideas, because every frame, it's ideas. Like when I write, I have so much ideas, and I have to now try to squeeze them in like 150 or 200 minutes, and it's not enough. And that somehow I always find the outlet of video installation very easy to prolong longs and to not interrupt them, because I feel like it's so embedded with many ideas. And this is what, like for instance, with the resurrection, a lot of people, of course you quoted the synopsis, but I don't find it as that. For me, it's not about that. But of course, that is one of the stories about 70-year-old widow who's willing to die, but now the cemetery is going to be flooded. But there is many ideas about the metamorphosis, about life, about the cycle of life that is sort of existing without us, that is sort of indifferent in a way. There's so many ideas about also the new and the old, and also my childhood, how I grew up, the folklores, the poetry, and also the existential crisis that one has, whether it's about God or whether it's about the earth itself. Also the reference to earth, where the umbilical cords are buried on this earth, where the placentas are buried in this earth, this connectivity. So it's a universe of ideas. And one can have one idea, like what you said earlier, that one can literally have a different idea than another person, but they're all correct, they're all right. You know, and I feel like this is what I always strive for, not necessarily for people to understand it, because I don't want people to understand it. I want people to feel it.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give you the chance, if you have anything to add.
Maybe just a thought about the possibilities that an institution like the Humboldt Forum could have. I think we already see things evolving and things coming out of what has been set up here. And this distinction that's made between the forum and the building. And so it's yet to be seen how this will play out. But I do think that there is some possibility, and an institution can decide this, to be like a place that is radically open to experiments and to maybe be a space that can try things or wants to try things that haven't yet happened in the society, to be like a sort of testing ground even. And I feel as though the artworks that you two created, they're for me, they're in that direction. They are giving stories that offer us a different way of being in the world, if only temporarily. And I think as a space that opens up the chance for an artist to do whatever they want, to exercise that ultimate freedom of creation, can be really valuable. And so I'm curious, I'm really curious to see what else will come out of here.
Which includes also your work, because you're just referring to us, but you also were contributing to it, I think, so exactly what you were saying.
I agree with you. I like to think that the work that we've done here is sort of plays emancipatory role of when you talk about deconstruction of a space. And I feel like, of course, it would be faulty to think that it's one way. I mean, there's another end that is also expected as well, that hopefully the structures would even open more doors in order to sort of transform the space in a way that it has this sort of accessibility, and that hopefully we're not the last people. There'll be more of people coming in and exhibiting their work, and yeah.
Also, this is really important. What are curators doing in order to really bring certain people together who maybe don't get like the same, visibility usually, or like whose stories are marginalized, which are not margin stories, but they are marginalized. So I think that's also really important, like that it's kind of also part of changing like structures in the industry.
So thank you all. Thank you, Priya Basil. Thank you,
Amina.
Jeremiah Mosese. Thank you, Zara Zandieh. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Humboldt Forum. Thank you for giving us this platform. I think that was very inspiring. For me, it was. It has left me with thoughts to process, and I hope that it did that the same for you. Thank you.